Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Ned Bellavance, nedinthecloud.com, and welcome to another Terraform Tuesdays. Ooh, I sang it. That was kind of fun. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We are going to have a guest on Terraform Tuesdays. My guest today is Matt White from Microsoft, and he's going to walk us through what Azure Verified Modules are. So let's jump over to my conversation with Matt White. Well, Matt White, welcome to Terraform Tuesdays. I'm really pumped to have you as a guest. Why don't you tell the good folks a little bit about yourself and what you do for Microsoft?
Thanks, Ned. I'm honored. I think I'm your first guest on. So, yeah,
Indeed.
what an honor that is. But yeah, I am part of the customer success unit at Microsoft, and I have the great honor of leading certain solution engineering projects. So, I am the Terraform lead for Azure Landing Zones. So, if you've used the Azure Landing Zones Terraform modules, that's me and my team. I also am the Terraform lead for something called Azure Verified Modules, which we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, that is certainly the topic of today. So let's start with like some basics. What are Azure Verified Modules and why are you creating them?
Yeah, great question. What we find customers do is that once they start looking for Terraform modules on the public internet, on the HashiCorp registry, there is no way for them to ascertain whether they are up to date, tested, even functional. And this is a particular problem in the Azure GitHub org because actually any FTE can create a repository in the Azure GitHub org. So
Oh,
what?
okay.
Yeah, so it's quite surprising. There's not, you can just literally click create. I want one. Thank you very much. So what we found is that there are certain science projects or kind of whatever you want to call it that have been out there a little while, and customers start using them, and then they're like, "Oh, this isn't supported or updated, or I'm not getting a response to my issues." So really, Azure Verified Modules is a program that we have created this FY in Microsoft to give customers supported modules, tested modules, and modules with all the features that they would come to expect.
Okay, I got you. So how do these differ? If I'm looking on the public registry, how do these differ from existing modules I might find for Azure?
Sure. So we have a really detailed spec on our website, and I'm sure we'll put the link on the screen and in the description. But it's
Yeah.
aka.ms/avm. And if you take a look over there, we spent a lot of time thinking about what are the standard features that customers want from their infrastructure as code modules. And we've tried to kind of harmonize both Bicep and Terraform as much as we can. Um, when you deploy resources in Azure, customers don't just want the resource. Typically, you also want to know, okay, I might want to create a role assignment on that resource. I might want to configure that resource with a private endpoint.
Mm,
I might want to configure that resource with a customer managed key. And our APIs behind the scenes are all kind of slightly different. And even the Terraform provider, Azure RM, is kind of slightly different in the way it implements these sometimes.
hmm
So what we've done is we've created standard interfaces for all these things. And we said, look, if you're writing a resource module for a Key Vault, you must support role assignments. You must support private endpoints. You must support
Okay.
all these things. Yeah. So you've got all this familiarity built in. You've got this functionality built in. So the idea is that it provides you a faster route to deployment because if you're familiar with one AVM module, you should be familiar with another and therefore know how to use it.
Okay, so I can expect some certain standard input variables to be defined and them to have the same structure across different modules.
Exactly. So if you know how to use a private endpoint on a storage account, it's exactly the same schema as on the Key Vault module and on every other one. So you kind of know how to do it. And hopefully what we're trying to do is make people's lives easier. That's
I'm
the idea.
laughing because that is such a time saver when I think about it, because you're right. It is implemented differently for different resources. So having a standard interface to work with is that alone is huge. And then I imagine it's the same deal with outputs. There's some outputs that are going to be commonly defined across all the modules, and I can expect that output to exist in the same format for different modules.
Yeah, exactly. So we will output the resource ID, for example, as a string, and you can then use that as in your dependency graph to create things from that. So yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's great. Now, in addition to that interface, is there a level of support I can expect from an Azure verified module versus a random module that I find on the registry?
Yeah, you can expect support. I think that's probably the kind of key message here. But we've actually defined what that looks like. So if you go aka.ms/avm/support, you will be able to see the support statement we're making. The highlight really is a response to a GitHub issue within 3 business days, but you're actually also able to raise support requests through your official Microsoft support channels, although they will inevitably end up going back to the same place. But yeah, GitHub issues is where we prefer to run the support from, but you can
Okay.
choose.
Cool. Now, if we want to dig into these modules a little bit, what's included in the modules? Is it all resource modules, or do you have some like data source modules? Is it kind of a smattering of everything?
So we've got 2 classifications of modules. One is a resource module, as we said, and there are some rules we've got around that, as well as the standard interfaces, which I've already spoken about. We also deploy a working resource. We're not trying to pinned to the API specs completely. So when you deploy a VM, you also get a disk and a network adapter. Right? It works. It's a working machine. You don't just get the virtual machine. Um, However, we don't go into the network side of things. Like we have a virtual networks module that deploys subnets as well, which brings me on to the child resources. So if you've got a resource for a storage account, it will also deploy the different types of storage APIs underneath. If you've got a resource for a key vault, it will also deploy keys, secrets, etc., etc. Likewise, virtual networks and subnets. So that's the kind of rules that we have around that. So you should, again, it's the familiarity thing. You know that if you pick the key vault module, that you can also deploy a secret if you wish. Now,
Okay.
yeah, so that hopefully that's kind of cool. Pattern modules are the other type of modules we have, which should be comprised of resource modules, but don't have to be. And the idea with this is, if you think about an application tier, so you've got N tier application, you might have a pattern module which deploys an application tier. Now that might be a network security group, a VM scale set, a load balancer, that kind of thing, and maybe a public IP optionally. So you can think, okay, well, I can use that pattern module, and if I put 2 or 3 of these together plus a SQL resource module for the back end, then I've got myself a classic, multi-tier application architecture that you can then start to build up. So we're kind of making the Lego bricks a bit bigger as we kind of go up the stack.
Sure, sure. And I assume you're expressing some opinions or best practices in those pattern modules.
Yeah, so pattern models are deliberately less rigid than resource modules. And I think, being honest, it's still early days. We're still looking to see how that kind of gets shaped. One example of a pattern module which is in the works now is something called AKS Production Standard. And what that is it's an opinionated deployment of AKS. For those that have deployed AKS, there are a lot of options. And what we found is trying to have an AKS resource module exposing all these different options and methods of deployment was actually massively complex. And what we thought, and customers were asking, is, look, I just want to deploy a production standard AKS cluster, which is actually based on what you get in the Azure portal. So pattern modules can be opinionated, and they might not expose absolutely everything that the resource does, in the advantage of making it simpler for people to consume. So yeah, we're still kind of playing around in that space, and we're looking for feedback essentially on the pattern modules that are out there.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, as someone who has built an AKS module before, I definitely agree with the number of options that are available. And I had to make some assumptions and some decisions for anybody who's going to consume that module. Be like, no, I don't want to let you even try to do that with this module. So that
Precisely.
totally makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Well, that's enough chatting about them. Why don't we see an Azure verified module in action? Do you have a demo you could walk us through?
Yeah, so we recently released, hot off the press, something called the AVM Terraform Labs. So let's bring that up now, and we can have a look at the website. So this
Okay.
is, again, everything's on a short link, so aka.ms/avm/tf/labs. So I'm going to start in the documentation site, and then we're going to dive into VS Code to see how this is put together. So yeah, this is an example scenario. The code is on GitHub, as you'd expect. So essentially, this is going to deploy a virtual network, subnets, NSGs, VMs, Key Vault storage account. But what it does is it showcases some of Azure Verified Modules features, such as the standard interfaces to customer managed keys, private endpoints, things like that. Now, at this early stage, not every resource has a corresponding resource module, but most do, and the important ones do. So this document here will guide you through the setup in terms of what you need to get started, where to get the lab files, and it builds you up it's not just a kind of fire and forget. We go, okay, well, what we're going to do is copy phase 1 into your local directory, and then we're going to run that and create some variables. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add the virtual networks in by copying number 2. Okay, and you gradually build up the files until you get down to the point where you've deployed the key vault, deployed the storage account, deployed the virtual machine. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to switch over to VS Code, and I'm going to take you through a little bit of the module declarations and what that looks like.
Okay.
Okay, so here we are in VS Code. You can see I've got all of my Terraform files here. I'm just going to pick out a few, hopefully interesting ones to demonstrate the standard interfaces that we have with Azure Verified Modules. This is the Key Vault module. You can see here that it's a reference from the registry. We've got some pretty standard inputs. We've got support for the child resources in terms of keys here. What we're doing is we're creating a key for a customer managed key for a storage account. So we've got that defined there. You'll notice this private endpoints map here has an object as an input. And if we look at the storage account module, you'll find that the private endpoints thing looks remarkably similar because we have a standard interface. So it's the same, right? It's the same way of doing it for everything. Same with managed identities. The same with managed identities, actually. Managed identities input is exactly the same for every resource as well. So if you want system signed, you set it to true. If you want user assigned, you drop the identity in there.
Okay.
So yeah, hopefully that kind of breeds that familiarity. Here again, we've got the containers. This is a child resource of the storage account, so we've got the containers in here. So hopefully you can kind of see if you know how to do customer managed keys on one resource, like private endpoints here, then you know how to do them on another resource because it's the same. And that's kind of what we're trying to get at. Likewise, role assignments is a map of role assignments that we're going to create here. Essentially, what this does is build up a picture. It deploys about 39 resources because obviously everything's eventually consistent in Azure. Sometimes you need to add a weight in. You can't help it. We've all done it. So yeah, but essentially that's what we're doing. What this does is builds up a set of resources. What you then eventually do is log onto the virtual machine, and using this machine's system assigned managed identity, you create a blob inside the blob storage account, which is encrypted with customer managed key and private endpoint and all of that kind of good stuff. So that's kind of what we do. And I did deploy this earlier, as you'd expect, because I don't know if you know Bastion. It takes a little while to deploy. So I did deploy this earlier. And you can see here it's 39 resource created. And it deploys and it's idempotent. And yeah, so as you'd expect, the quality is kind of there. Now, what I'd like to do now is I can quickly show you in the portal, and we can dive back in there and have a look at the resources that it's deployed.
Sure.
Okay, so here we are in the Azure portal. You can see we've got our resource group that is created, and you can see all of these resources that have been created for us, and private endpoints, key vaults, hopefully private DNS zones, all the kind of stuff you need to wire this up. So hopefully this gives you a really good experience and a really good idea of what Azure Verified Modules is about. I'd love you to go and check out the demo code on the website and check it out for yourself.
Awesome. So Matt, that was really cool that we got to see how the verified modules can all kind of work together to build a larger set of infrastructure. Now, if someone is thinking about modules they've written in the past, maybe they're thinking, I'd like to contribute to these verified modules. Are they able to do that? Are you taking suggestions or actual contributions to the modules?
We will take all the help we can get, Ed. So yeah, because the modules are supported by Microsoft, we have to have a full-time employee that kind of sponsors it and is ultimately responsible for it. We already have modules which are essentially maintained by our community, and we massively appreciate that. So if you're interested and you want to get involved, then go to ak.ms/module triage, when you can see our backlog of all the modules that we've got in GitHub. And once you're there, if you want to put your name down against one of them, say, hey, I'd like to help on this, then absolutely would love to hear from you.
Okay. And, because of the nature of modules, they're all open source. You can see what's in there. And so you're not only asking, well, people can file issues if they like, but you're saying people can also contribute back to the modules with actual code and issuing, pull requests and whatnot.
They certainly can. I think there's probably two sides to that. The one is just your general, I'm a good open source citizen. I've spotted a bug. I've spotted a thing. I'm just going to go and do something about it. The
Right.
second is where you actually work more closely with us and say, look, let's collaborate more closely on this, and you take on more responsibility and are ultimately end up writing most of the code in the module. And kind of we can work as flexibly as you like, as you can.
Gotcha. If I do want to, jump in feet first, what's the developer experience like when I want to author an Azure Verified module?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me just fire up Visual Studio Code. Cool. So here we are in Visual Studio Code, and this is a module that I write and that I look after. And we've actually got a something called a dev container. So we've actually got a container behind the scenes where we can standardize all our tooling and all our test frameworks and stuff like that. So if we bring up a terminal here, you can see that I'm in the dev container because I'm root and it says dev container down here. We've
Right.
installed some really useful utilities in there. I mean, like, I don't know how often you write Terraform modules and you maybe want to test out a new Terraform feature, but you haven't got the version installed. So we've got TFN is built right into here. So you don't need to worry about how difficult it is to install new Terraform versions. You can just go TFN views, I know 1.4.0, and it'll go off and download it for you.
Gotcha.
It's really we've tried to make it really easy to um, to develop for. The other thing that we've got is we're really opinionated about how a Terraform should look. So if I this is quite a tidy resource definition. You can see you've got the kind of key stuff on top, and then everything else is in alphabetical order. That's no accident. Okay, so I'm going to mess this up a bit and put this down here. I'm also going to be really bad and put this dynamic block like right in the middle of there. Okay, and that's still valid, right? That will still work. It just looks horrible.
Right.
The other the other thing I'm going to do is completely butcher the README file and delete that. So yeah, I'm in a mess now, and you can see that my Git has found a difference between what's committed and what's not. So how do we fix that? Well, there's a really easy command, a really easy command we can run called make pre-commit. Now we run that from inside the container, and it goes and does a load of stuff. And what you'll find is, oh, this made my Terraform look pretty again. Thank you very much. We don't
Oh,
have to we don't have to do that. So that's a tool that we've written called AVM Fix, which is just an opinionated way of how your Terraform code should look. But the idea is that if all AVM modules are the same, then it kind of breeds that familiarity. You kind of know what they look like. It's easy to, hopefully, makes it easy to develop for. And all the documentation, as you can see, is automatically generated because it's put all that back.
I love that level of consistency between the modules. And I'm not going to lie, I might steal that tool from you to
It's open
make
source.
all the
It's in the
blocks
Azure
look
orgs. You
great.
can do it. Yeah, yeah.
That's huge. It's like Terraform FMT on steroids, right?
Totally. Yeah, yeah. It's
Very
cool. I
cool.
really like it. Yeah.
Awesome. Now I know you're just getting started with Azure Verified Modules, and that's a big thing to bite off to begin with. But people are probably also wondering if you're going to be supporting other providers that are in sort of the Microsoft ecosystem. I'm thinking Entra ID, which is still named Azure AD in the
Yep.
provider,
Yep.
Azure DevOps, or maybe even the GitHub provider, since that is technically owned by Microsoft. Are there going to be verified modules for those providers?
Yeah, so we don't yet have a strategy for resource modules for all those providers, but we do have modules currently using them. So the role assignments module that my friend Jared wrote actually uses the Azure AD module to make it super simple to create role assignments. Like you can look up principal IDs by user display name or user email address or stuff like that. So we already use other providers. We already support and tolerate, I guess you could say, other providers yet, even though we don't have detailed specs for them. So don't
Right.
feel like, you've got an idea, I've got a really cool idea for a pattern module, but I need the GitHub provider. That's totally fine.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, if people are interested and they want to learn more, I know you threw out a bunch of links. Like, what's the best link to go to start out with?
Cool. Yeah. The main link is aka.ms/AVM. Take you to our main website. Everything's linked off there.
Awesome. And what about you, Matt? Are you active on LinkedIn? Do you have a YouTube
Cool.
channel you want to maybe plug?
I do. Yeah. Thanks, Ned. My GitHub name is Matt FFFFFF. So Matt White in hex. Matt White's a surprisingly common name. So I just went slightly, slightly off
I love
piste with
it.
that one. But yeah, it's cool. And I do have a very, very small YouTube channel. The link will be in the description below. If you want to check it out, I'll be very grateful.
Awesome. Well, Matt White, thank you so much for joining me on Terraform Tuesday.
You're welcome, Ned. Thanks very much.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Azure Verified Modules. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Terraform Tuesday. I've never had a guest before, and I kind of liked it. Do you have suggestions for future guests you'd like to see on a Terraform Tuesday episode? Let me know down in the comments, or hit me up on LinkedIn, or you can even go to the website and fill out the contact form. It's really up to you. Whatever you want to do. That's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, and all those things. Until next time, keep calm and Terraform on. Drinking out of my Carly Rae Jepsen mug. Got my new Irises Lego thing. I'm feeling pretty.